tend to think of intelligence as something special, right?
Yeah, you should.
Something that, lights up in a brain. Maybe ours when we're tackling a tough problem, or perhaps a really clever animal figuring something out.
Sure, that's the common view.
But what if that's just, well, scratching the surface? What if intelligence is actually more fundamental, like a feature of everything?
That's exactly the fascinating territory we're digging into today.
Okay.
We're doing a deep dive into Luiz von Paumgarten's ideas in the Abstractionists papers.
Ah, right.
Specifically looking at this concept he calls natural intelligence.
Okay, so this isn't just another theory to kind of file away. The mission here for us is to really consider a radically different perspective on how things learn and adapt.
Totally, friend.
We're talking about a potential universal capability, something, far broader than our usual definition of intelligence.
Precisely. And to help us navigate this, we'll be using some key concepts in the book. Think of natural reality as the big picture, the framework.
Yeah.
And within that, there's this crucial distinction between red space.
Red space.
Yeah, that's basically our world of experience and interpretation.
Yeah.
Both what we feel inside, our subjective stuff, and what we observe outside, the objective stuff. It's all built
Built how?
through interpretation. And then there's blue space.
And blue space is...
That's the underlying engine, just pure processes and interactions, the causation domain. No interpretation there, just stuff happening and causing other stuff to happen.
Blue space. That sounds really intriguing. I saw a review of the book mentioning something like everything is connected, and this image, like a temporary eddy in an eternal stream.
Yeah, that captures it well.
It really hints at this deep underlying connection, something we don't usually see in our day-to-day. How does this tie into this idea of natural intelligence being everywhere?
Well, the core idea, the proposition of this natural reality framework, is that intelligence isn't some latecomer. Something that only evolved in complex life forms.
Right, that's the standard story.
Instead, it suggests that this capacity for learning and adaptation, it's actually a fundamental attribute of a natural reality itself. It's woven right into the fabric of existence, basically.
Hold on a sec. Are we really talking about, like, pebble learning to roll downhill, or the sun adapting as it burns hydrogen?
Yeah.
An electron being intelligent? That sounds...
Radical.
a massive shift in perspective, yeah.
It does sound radical, absolutely. But the framework suggests the same fundamental processes of learning and adaptation, responding to change, adjusting based on that response, are actually at play across all these seemingly different things.
So not consciousness necessarily?
Not consciousness as we experience it, no. It's intelligence in its most basic universal form. Responding, adjusting, interacting.
Okay, let's try to unpack that a bit more, this intelligence is everywhere idea.
Yeah.
How does the Abstractionists' papers actually explain this? What's the mechanism behind it?
So a really key part of understanding this is that difference between red space and blue space we mentioned. Red space is, well, everything we experience.
Yeah.
Our inner world, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and the external world as we perceive it, through our senses, through our scientific instruments.
Objective and objective stuff, got it.
But crucially, all of it, all of red space, is constructed through interpretation. It's a model. Blue space, on the other hand, that's the underlying causal reality. It's purely processes and interactions, things influencing other things.
So no inherent meaning or form there.
None inherently, just the raw engine of cause and effect.
So our minds are constantly taking in this blue space stuff, these raw interactions, and then building a red space, our version of reality, that makes sense to us. Like we're making our own map of a territory we can't actually see directly.
That's a great way to put it, exactly. Think of it like, imagine wearing a blindfold, right? And you're trying to navigate a room just by feeling the objects around you.
Okay.
Your mind builds an internal model of that room that's your red space.
Yeah.
Based purely on those touch interactions. Now, that model feels completely real and complete to you.
Yeah, it would have to.
But it's still just your interpretation, your construction, based on the underlying objects, the blue space that you're actually touching.
Yeah.
Our red space, while totally essential for survival, often hides the underlying reality of pure process.
We get lost in the map.
We get so caught up in our mental model. Yeah, that we forget it is a model. We think it's direct access, but it's not.
That blindfold analogy, that really makes it click. So if everyone's wearing their own blindfold, constantly building their own internal map, does that mean we all experience reality in our own unique way? Is my red space different from yours?
Precisely. That's fundamental to the framework.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that each mind independently constructs its own red space
Right.
through its unique history of interpretations based on its interactions within the shared blue space.
Okay.
And this leads to two key principles. First, parallelism. We're all building our realities separately in parallel.
Right.
And second, orthogonality. This means we have no direct window into anyone else's internal model, their red space. We can't just beam thoughts or experiences.
So how do we interact then?
Only through the shared causation domain, the blue space, actions and reactions. My actions become interactions in blue space that you interpret into your red space, and vice versa.
Wow. So when we disagree about something we both saw, it's literally like we're comparing two different maps of the same underlying territory, each drawn slightly differently based on our own perspective and history.
Exactly that. Different interpretations of the same blue space interactions, leading to different red space experiences.
That explains a lot about arguments, actually. Okay, so how does learning and adaptation fit into this picture, this red space, blue space dynamic?
Learning and adaptation are basically the fundamental ways the mind manages the relationship between its internal map, its red space, and the external territory, the blue space interactions.
That's so.
Well, think about how we deal with contradictions and paradoxes. You know, the classic chicken and egg or the ship of Theseus problem.
Yeah, philosophical head scratchers.
Right, but the abstractionist papers suggest they're more than just abstract puzzles. They actually reveal the limits of our current internal models, our red space constructs.
Ah, they show where the map is wrong or incomplete.
Exactly. They highlight areas where our understanding of reality doesn't quite add up. And that mismatch, that cognitive dissonance, is what drives the need for adjustment. It forces learning.
So when we encounter something that doesn't fit our understanding, our brain doesn't just, like, crash. It actively tries to resolve the contradiction.
Absolutely. The mind actively works to reduce that dissonance.
Yeah.
It essentially goes into a loop, trying out different ways to make sense of the conflicting information within its existing framework, its current logic.
And if the old logic just doesn't work.
Then the mind has to get creative. It has to modify its underlying assumptions, maybe tweak its internal model, its red space logic, to better align its expectations with its actual observations from blue space.
That sounds like real adaptation.
It is. This ongoing process detecting mismatches, looping, adjusting our understanding, that's the core of adaptation. It's how the model gets refined.
And this ties into the idea of emergence, doesn't it? When these adjustments aren't just tweaks, but lead to something fundamentally new.
Exactly right. Emergence is a crucial piece of this universal intelligence puzzle. It's what happens when a process kind of evolves beyond its initial boundaries. It leads to new forms, new behaviors that weren't obvious or even possible before.
Like a phase transition?
Sort of, yeah. The book suggests that when a system, whether it's a mind struggling with a paradox, or maybe something simpler facing a constraint, when it can no longer sustain itself in its current state, change and reorganization at a fundamental level become the only way forward.
And that reorganization is where the new stuff comes from.
That's where novelty arises. That's emergence. Think about water molecules. Individually, they just jostle around. But get enough together under the right conditions, suddenly you have the emergent property of a wave. Something completely new arises from the collective interaction.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you give some more examples, maybe from the book's perspective, of emergence in different areas?
Sure. Let's think personally. Maybe learning from a really difficult breakup.
Okay. Painful, but potentially useful.
Right. Initially, you might just blame external stuff. They were wrong, bad timing, whatever. But eventually, perhaps you recognize a deeper, maybe flawed pattern in how you approach relationships. Your framing was off.
Ah, seeing your own contribution.
Exactly. That shift in your internal understanding, that's an emergence of a new perspective. It can lead to fundamentally different, hopefully better relationships later on.
That's a good one. What about skills?
Skill acquisition is another great example. Learning, say, a musical instrument. Early on, practice feels clunky, very deliberate, right? You're consciously thinking about every finger placement.
Definitely. Very mechanical.
But with enough repetition, enough interaction, something new emerges, a kind of fluid mastery. Your fingers just seem to know where to go. That reflected deep reorganization of your internal model, your red space representation of the instrument and the music.
So the conscious effort dissolves into unconscious competence?
In a way, yeah. The model becomes much more efficient. Even look at AI. I think about deep learning models. You train them on massive data sets.
Right.
And sometimes They exhibit capabilities that weren't explicitly programmed in. They generalize, they create things. That's a form of emergent intelligence arising from the complex interaction of data and algorithms.
And even just thinking about thinking.
Metacognition, yes. The ability to reflect on our own thought processes to improve how we solve problems. That itself is a higher level emergent property of the mind. Thinking about the model to improve the model.
These examples really help illustrate how systems can kind of hit a wall and then reorganize themselves into something new, something more capable.
Precisely. And the book introduces this concept called general selection within natural reality. Think of it as the engine driving both these small, incremental adaptations and the bigger, transformative leaps of emergence.
General selection. How does that work?
It operates by constantly integrating variability within a system. Internal fluctuations, external pressures, and shifting what's called causal impedance.
Causal impedance. What's that?
Think of it like the stickiness or resistance of a system's own rules or structure. High impedance means it's very resistant to change. It sticks to its current path. Low impedance means it's more flexible, more open to adaptation and reorganization.
So general selection favors systems that can manage their stickiness.
Essentially, yes. It suggests that systems that can effectively handle variability, both internal and external, and adjust their causal impedance, become more flexible when needed, more stable when needed, are the ones that tend to persist and evolve over time.
Okay, this is getting deep. How does this connect back to the idea of, say, an atom or an electron showing this natural intelligence? That still feels like a big leap.
It is a leap from our usual thinking, but the framework suggests that even seemingly simple processes, like an atom releasing energy as a photon, as light, that's part of this universal pattern of interaction and response.
How so? It just seems like physics.
Well, view it this way. The light emission isn't just passive information transfer. It's a consequence of an internal adjustment within the atom, a way it changes state to interact with its environment, maybe settle into a lower energy state. It's a response.
A response to what? Quantum fields?
To the causal environment, yeah. And then other processes, other atoms or fancy detectors, engage with that photon, that variation, based on their own internal models, which are just their inherent structures and quantum rules.
So even at that fundamental level, there's this interaction, this response based on internal structure, a kind of adaptation to the conditions.
That's the idea. It's adaptation in its most basic form.
Yeah.
And scaling up, the cosmos itself, stars forming, burning fuel, galaxies evolving, can be seen as reality propagating through these continuous interactions. These huge celestial bodies are just incredibly complex processes in motion, constantly adapting to gravitational and energetic environments.
And this framework also has a different take on time itself, right? It's not just the background clock ticking away.
That's right. Within natural reality, time isn't seen as this fundamental linear river flowing uniformly for everything everywhere. It's framed differently. It's more like a measure of impedance or admittance related to how processes participate in causation. Basically, the rate at which change can occur within a specific process or interaction.
So time can flow differently for different processes.
Effectively, yes. High temporal impedance would mean things change slowly within that process. Low impedance, things change rapidly. This perspective decouples adaptation from a single universal clock. These fundamental processes of interaction and adaptation are happening based on their own causal relationships, not just ticking along some cosmic timeline.
So reality isn't playing out on a stage of space and time? Maybe space and time themselves are somehow emerging from all these underlying interactions, part of the red space construction?
That's definitely the direction the framework points. It talks about the process universe.
Process universe.
Yeah, viewing reality as this vast, interconnected web of relationships and causation unfolding dynamically without needing fixed, pre-existing reference points of space and time. Those might be constructs we use to map it.
That really reinforces the idea that these ongoing processes of interaction and change are what's truly fundamental.
Exactly. And even something like an electron. It's not just a static little ball sitting in space. It's better viewed as a dynamic process itself, constantly engaging with its surroundings, its behavior, governed by these underlying causal fields or spaces, like charge and spin. It's always interacting, always adapting its state within those fields.
Wow. Okay. This is genuinely causing me to rethink some very basic assumptions about reality. So if this capacity for learning and adaptation, driven by interaction and response, if that is this fundamental characteristic of reality at all levels, what are the big implications? Where does this take us?
Well, the implications are potentially huge. revolutionary even. If intelligence in this really broad sense is a universal capacity, think about how that could reshape our understanding of consciousness.
Maybe not so unique to humans or complex animals?
Perhaps not as unique as we think, or maybe it exists on a spectrum we haven't considered. It could change how we view life itself. The line between living and non-living might get much blurrier at a fundamental process level.
The old definitions might not hold up.
They might need serious revision. And it could offer completely new perspectives on the nature and evolution of the entire universe. It suggests a deeper level of inherent dynamism and responsiveness in, well, everything.
The outline also mentioned something about an abstractionist movement and some potentially far-out technologies.
Ah, yes. The abstractionist movement is presented partly as a call to action, to engage with these ideas, explore them, and see where they lead, maybe find practical applications.
Okay. And the technologies.
Well, there are concepts described in the abstractionist papers, like opera glasses. This is imagined as a theoretical augmented reality system.
Like Google Glass, but different.
Way different. The idea is it could potentially allow us to perceive the underlying causation domain, the blue space interactions, more directly.
See the raw processes instead of just our interpretation.
Imagine being able to visualize the influences, the relationships, the raw causal flow that gives rise to our experienced reality. That could be an incredibly powerful tool for understanding complex systems, maybe even ourselves.
That would be mind-blowing. What else?
There's also the concept of a reality translation engine.
Translating reality.
The idea there is more about bridging the gaps between different mind realities, different red spaces. If we understand how we each construct our reality based on blue space interactions, maybe we can develop ways to better understand each other's models, improve communication, find common ground, harmonize perspectives.
So using the framework to improve human interaction, essentially.
That seems to be one potential application, yes.
Yeah.
Acknowledging and working with the fact that we all operate within our own constructed realities.
It's a lot to take in, but incredibly thought-provoking. If you had to distill it down, what's the key insight you'd want people listening to really walk away with?
I think the absolute core takeaway from exploring the abstractionist papers is this radical reimagining of intelligence. It's pushing us to see it not just as a feature of complex brains,
Right.
but potentially as a fundamental capacity for learning and adaptation that is actually a universal characteristic of natural reality itself.
From the smallest particle
To the largest structures in the cosmos, yeah.
Yeah.
Driven by interaction and response.
It definitely makes you look at the world around you differently. You start wondering, is there a kind of intelligence, in this broader sense, operating in places we just never even considered, like in a forest ecosystem or a weather pattern?
Exactly. It opens up those questions. The framework encourages you to consider how seeing intelligence as this fundamental capacity might offer entirely new ways of understanding things that seemed unrelated before.
Well, this has been a truly deep dive, and it has certainly stretched my understanding of, well, pretty much everything. If this discussion has sparked your curiosity, and how could it not?
Right.
We definitely recommend checking out the Abstractionists' papers for yourself. We mentioned it's available freely online, just search for it, or head to www.welcometothe.bluespace.com.
Yeah, it's all there.
Be prepared, though. It's a journey into some really fascinating, sometimes mind-bending ideas. This deep dive is really just a glimpse.
Absolutely. It's a complex framework with a lot more detail. Maybe a final thought for you to ponder.
Please.
If learning and adaptation truly are universal, what does that ultimately tell us about the very nature of existence itself? And what does it imply about the potential for change, for evolution at every single level of reality?